It's finally Friday. It's Friday, Friday.
Thank God it's
All right, welcome back to the Friday Show, presented this week by Indiana Racing and that state's Breed Development Fund. I'm Scott Jagow, along with Ray Paulick. So glad you could join us. Coming up, we're going to talk some Kentucky Derby. But Ray, first, a war of words in Baltimore this week. The mayor of that city came out with a letter to the state legislators and the governor, pretty scathing about the Stronach Group's plans going forward, or at least their plans as of now, to prop up Laurel Park and make it a super track. That's the words that Tim Ritvo used. And then also create an equine health and training center at Bowie instead of spending the money to rebuild Pimlico. What did you make of what the mayor said?
Well, first of all, I understand this is a sensitive topic for the city of Baltimore because it wasn't that long ago that Robert Irsay moved the Baltimore Colts out of town in the middle of the night on a moving van and moved them to Indianapolis. But they're not moving the Preakness to Indianapolis. They're moving it just down the road to Laurel. It doesn't make sense in this era to put money into two racetracks that are 25, 30 miles apart. And when they bought the Maryland Jockey Club tracks, they looked at both facilities. Originally, they said they were going to do something with Pimlico, but the more they looked at it, the more sense it made to put their big events at Laurel, to invest in Laurel, to train at Bowie, and to work with the city to do something with the property at Pimlico.
Let me ask you a question. When you go to Laurel Park, where do you stay?
I stay in Baltimore.
Yeah, exactly. It's not that far from Baltimore. I understand the sentiment that it's a Baltimore event, but it's really a Maryland event. And I am on your side with this because dollars and cents wise, I mean, there's no argument. It's going to cost $424 million to rebuild Pimlico. And you've been to Pimlico many years. I have as well. I mean, the place, a couple of years ago, we couldn't even use the bathrooms in the press box during the Preakness. I mean, it's not in great shape. It's going to cost $424 million to rebuild that, as opposed to they don't even need state or local funds to renovate Laurel Park because it's already stipulated in the budget that they have money to go toward things like that. So it's $120 million. And then there's also the Bowie project, which it isn't that much money. They're asking for some funds for that, but not state or local funds, which is going to require to rebuild Pimlico. And the Stronach Group is a private company that owns the racetrack, so they can do what they want. They were, as you pointed out, they were trying to, make an agreement with the city of Baltimore so that they could turn it into something useful. And the city of Baltimore now is kind of slapping them in the face, and I don't think this is going to go very well for them.
Yeah, I've been coming to Baltimore for a long time. The neighborhood around Pimlico has gotten gradually worse. They can rebuild Pimlico, but they can't rebuild the neighborhood. But if they take that property and turn it into something else that maybe can be good for the entire neighborhood and help it, come back to life a little bit, I think that would be good. But moving the Preakness and moving major events, they're talking about a Breeders' Cup there, to Laurel makes a lot of sense because it now incorporates another major city, which is Washington, D.C. It's midway between the two. There's going to be a rail line that will take people right there. That you can't ask for better transportation to and from the racetrack on a big day than rail travel. And I'm envisioning the Preakness at Laurel as being this huge event for Maryland. People coming from D.C., people coming from Baltimore and beyond, because rail travel goes up to New York. You can take a train from New York and get off at Laurel Park. So I just don't see what could be better than that.
Yeah, and the arguments, people in this business always cling to the past, and I understand the tradition aspect of this. But I would argue that people watching on television, the many millions who are watching on television, if you move the Preakness to a different racetrack, they will have no idea that it's been moved. The Kentucky Derby, maybe. And I would argue many people wouldn't even notice if you move the Kentucky Derby somewhere else. But I certainly will argue that the Preakness and the Belmont Stakes as well. Because people ask me all the time, where is the Belmont? Where is the Preakness? They don't even know what state it's in. So, I just think moving it 25, 30 miles down the road isn't a big deal. It's still in Maryland. It's still in proximity to Baltimore. And as you point out, it's closer to Washington, D.C. You've got the transportation aspect of it. People say, what major event, moves around? Or the Super Bowl. The Super Bowl is in a different city every year. I mean, come on. That's the most watched sporting event on the planet.
Well, there's a major event in standardbred racing and harness racing called the Hamiltonian, and that's at the Meadowlands every year. Well, it wasn't always at the Meadowlands. It used to be at the fairgrounds near Springfield, Illinois, I think DeCoin, Illinois. So I don't think the Hamiltonian has been hurt by moving it from one track to another, one state to another. It's not like they're saying we're going to move it to Gulfstream Park or Santa Anita Park, other tracks owned by the Stronach Group. They're moving it down the road. I totally don't understand it. People will still spend their money in Baltimore. It's going to be good for the city of Baltimore. Some will spend it in Washington, D.C., and that's fine too. But this is not the end of the world if they move it.
Well, let's get some opinions on this. We have a poll on our website. What do you think about this issue? Should the taxpayers put up money to rebuild Pimlico so that the Preakness can stay in Baltimore? Let us know. We have a poll at PaulickReport.com. All right, Ray, it's fast approaching, always at this time of year. It just kind of sneaks up on us. The big races for the Kentucky Derby are a couple of weeks away, honestly. So, at this point, anything stand out to you?
I don't want to knock horses that have won races, but I don't think we've seen the Kentucky Derby winner yet this year in a stakes race. It seems to me that what's happening is that the better horses are getting a later and later start because that's where the big points are available in the prep races, the 50 and 100 point races. So the Risen Star was the first of the 50s, and I know a lot of people really like the horse that won that race, War of Will, but I don't think he's going to win the Kentucky Derby. I can't remember the last time a horse came through Louisiana to win the Kentucky Derby.
Yeah. Well, the weather in California this year so far has been really weird for California standards. I mean, it's a lot of rain. It's cooler. You're in Del Mar, so you know firsthand what it's been. And you talked to Bob Baffert about this. What's been the impact of the weather? Because California has been producing a lot of Derby winners in the recent years.
Yeah, the one thing about the rain out here is usually it's predicted well in advance, and you can kind of plan and train around it. And he made a point that not only, sometimes they've had to close the track for training in the morning, but you want to be careful with young horses, especially after they close the track, because they seal it. It's a harder track. It's harder on feet. So Baffert said the one thing he said to manage is just making sure that the horses are training on a track that's not been sealed. And so it does make it a little difficult, and there's probably more rain coming. They've had, it's been drought season for several years, so this is welcome rain in a way. But I think it's disrupted a lot of training for California horses. Yeah,
and you think about that in terms of the Kentucky Derby. Nothing should go wrong on the trail to the Kentucky Derby. I mean, that's generally the rule. So it'll be interesting because, of course, Bob Baffert, when it comes to the Derby, in recent memory, he's the guy. So, and he has 3 top, choices on the road to the Kentucky Derby so far. And so it'll be interesting to see if someone else can step up this year and take the crown, literally the Triple Crown, 2 of the last 4 years. Interesting. There are some horses that have not had that many starts. Like Hidden Scroll is one that comes to mind. The Belmont trainee, he jumped up even before he started. People knew about him, and then he won in the slot by 14 or whatever it was. And so you've got horses like that. I mean, this day and age, they're not running 10 times before February. It's he didn't even start at 2. So and Justify won last year, the whole Apollo thing, breaking the curse, and now it just seems like that's the way it's done. Fewer starts, 2 or 3.
Yeah, part of me still thinks though that racing experience is important. Justify was an exceptional horse who was able to get through it all without having raced at 2. I do think that when you get in a 20-horse field on Derby Day, racing experience matters, especially if you're not a horse that goes to the front like Justify did. If you're a front-running horse, you can probably get away with a lighter campaign. But if you're a horse that has to come from out of it, racing experience matters. So I'm not sure that we're going to see a repeat of what Justify did last year, not racing at 2.
Yeah, and again, the favorite has won the last 6 runnings of the Kentucky Derby ever since the point system started. Yeah. So, I mean, look, who's the favorite? That's the question you have to ask. And all those horses, not all of them, but most of them have been stalking front-running types. So they've gotten out of the quagmire of the 20-horse field, or being an exception. We'll see this year, how that shapes up. All right, that's going to do it for this edition of the Friday Show presented by Indiana Racing. There are more than 20 stakes, Indiana sired, Indiana bred stakes that are worth $100,000 or more, and there's $16 million in incentives on the table. Thanks for joining us. We'll talk to you next time.